Streets Committee. Nicole.
Thanks, Susan. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of all of us at the Concord Public Library, I want to thank you for your support of our work and of Concord Reads. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the wonderful community partners who we've had the pleasure of working with this year, including NHTI, UNH Law, New Hampshire Public Radio, Red River Theaters, and the Concord Monitor. I am very pleased to introduce this year's guest author, Benjamin Rachlin. His book, Ghost of the Innocent Man, A True Story of Trial and Redemption, this year's selection for Concord Reads, was named a Best Book of 2017 by NPR, the San Francisco Chronicle, Library Journal, and Shelf Awareness. It was a finalist for the 2018 Dayton Literacy Peace Prize, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, and an Amazon Best Book of the Month. Ghost of the Innocent Man tells the heart-wrenching story of an innocent man's 25 years in prison and his relentless champion's efforts to prove his innocence. Brought with examples of the shortcomings of the country's criminal justice system, the story is also suffused with hope and the possibility of meaningful reform, as it follows the gallant efforts of the people who are working to change the system. Benjamin Rachlin, the storyteller behind Ghost of the Innocent Man, grew up in New Hampshire. He studied English at Bowdoin College and writing at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. His work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, The New Republic, Pacific Standard, Virginia Quarterly Review, Time, Orion, Lit Hub, and as of today, Medium. He has written on topics ranging from blind sailing to the business of local honey to climate change. Ghost of the Innocent Man is Benjamin's first book. We have the distinct pleasure tonight to have Benjamin here in Concord, his hometown, to discuss the process behind writing such a carefully researched and profound literary work and to answer your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Benjamin Rachlin.
How are we on audio? Good? All right. There's much discussion about how high or low and then the tail of this microphone should be. So, I want to say thank you to Nicole and Susan and Todd at the Concord Public Library and the Foundation. I also want to thank more broadly Red River, Gibson's, who all have a hand in making not just tonight happen, but the whole sort of preceding suite of events. In addition to that, I want to thank Concord High, NHPR, folks at the Monitor, and maybe most importantly, you all. I don't think that every writer, particularly debut writer, has the experience of feeling upon the launch of his first book the backing of an entire community, the way I have felt over the past year or two. And every one of the institutions I've named has really gone out of its way to sort of be a cheerleader, be a supporter. And I can't tell you how cool that's felt. And so I just want to thank all those people and thank all of you for showing up, for sort of being so cool and warm and supportive to someone who grew up here. It's meant a lot, and so thank you. So often, I mean, for the majority of the book tour, there's only like 4 events, but I still get to call it a book tour. And for a lot of events since, I mean, I speak primarily about the criminal justice system and just a little bit about sort of the writing. And the reason is that of course, the book is partly about the criminal justice system, and that's the way a lot of readers have encountered it, and so that's sort of, I try to meet them there. But I thought I would do something a little bit different today. Because it's a visiting writer series, I thought I'd talk about the writing, and sort of how a book gets put together, or how I don't know how others do it, how my book got put together, and how I tried to go from sort of a pile of facts to immersive narrative, because that's really how I encountered this story, not as a politician or an activist or a policymaker, but as a storyteller, as someone sort of on the lookout, available to really amazing human stories. And that's what I saw when I saw Willie and these attorneys. I saw this incredible story. And so I'm gonna skip the part where I describe how I learned to sort of become a reporter. That's a whole different talk. Just believe me that I did a lot of reporting. And so, for example, I mean, for me, that process is basically get as much stuff as I can. Talk to anyone I can who seems to know something. Read everything I can that has something to offer. And for this story, so I think many of you will know that the basic, I say plot because it's a book, but this happened, obviously. This story centers around this true story, this man named Willie Grimes, who was wrongly convicted of the sexual assault of an elderly woman named Carrie Elliott, and spent 24 years in prison for that crime, which he did not commit. And then the unusual team of lawyers who finally proved him innocent. And so my sort of crash course in learning to be a reporter and all this stuff to get my hands on looked like, in this case, police. Willie waived attorney-client privilege on my behalf. And so I had police and attorney files. I had trial transcripts. I actually had 3 of them. Some of you might know that there was a trial originally. Then there was a hearing 22 years later that the Innocence Inquiry Commission held in this case. And then there was a 3-judge panel 2 years after that. And so I had 3 different transcripts of trial proceedings. I had local newspaper coverage that I dug up from the time. I'd interviewed Willie, his current lawyer, the director of the Innocence Commission, this agency that finally freed him. I tracked down the court reporter, actually, who was there in 1988 for this trial, who, and I realized, of course, had no recollection of the case. Sort of belatedly, I realized that being in the room for a wrongful conviction feels identical to being in the room for a trial. You only realize it's a wrongful conviction afterward. So I had this surprising experience of tracking down people, thinking, what an act of repertorial genius, this is going to be a breakthrough. And they had no clue, because they'd been in that courtroom for who knows how many trials. Prosecutors at the time, one had passed away. One was a recluse. He lives now in like the middle of the woods and doesn't answer his phone. I found the judge at the time. He had passed away, but I found a memorial biography that colleagues had done about him, so I was able to get some information. I tracked down Willie's original defense attorney, who actually declined to speak with me, and I decided I'll speak with him again later. So I had all this stuff. And then I had this really harrowing moment of, oh my God, I have all this stuff. I mean, I had thousands, tens of thousands of pages of this stuff, these documents, and I didn't even, like, where do you even begin? How do you move from that to an immersive narrative? And I had no idea, and it was really overwhelming, and I thought, why did I try this as my first major project? And I mean, what it feels like is that moment where you have a jigsaw puzzle and you empty out the pieces, and you just have this mound of, like, what do I do? And so I spent a few days sort of pulling out my hair and feeling terrible, and then thought, well, if that's what it feels like, why not just do what you do with a jigsaw puzzle? What you do with a jigsaw puzzle is you start putting pieces that look similar in similar piles. These pieces have straight edges. They're the border. They go over here. These pieces are blue. They're sky. They go over there. This is grass green over here. And so I just started putting documents into piles, started calling them clusters, of just like stuff. And after a few days of doing that, I realized that actually there were kind of clusters. And in fact, most of the stuff fell into one of 4 categories. I know this, ignore this for now. I know it might be a little hard to read at the back. I'll read through it for all of you so you don't have to sort of depend only on your vision. I'll do the best I can with the board, so don't stress. We'll get through it together. So I had these 4 clusters of stuff. So basically, all that stuff fell into one of these 4 categories. Either it had to do with crime, which is this one night on October 24th, 1987. So as I said, this is an assault of an elderly woman in North Carolina, a town called Hickory, which is about an hour northwest of Charlotte. Basically, there's a knock on this woman's door. This woman, whose name is Carrie Elliott, goes to answer. This unfamiliar man appears on her doorstep, forces his way in, assaults her, and then vanishes into darkness. So I had all this documentation, police report stuff about that night, the crime. Then cluster 2 was the police investigation, which was basically the 6 days following the crime, what the police had done in Hickory to try to solve what had happened and find the guy. Then I had the alibi, which is what Willie was actually doing. I mean, spoiler alert, it wasn't Willie. And so I had the 7 days between coinciding with from crime to police investigation with what Willie was actually doing, which is basically going to work, seeing his friends, driving down 40 minutes to Shelby to pay taxes on his land, just what he was up to while the police were undergoing an investigation that would unfortunately to him. And finally I had the trial, which was happened 4 days in July of '88, the summer after this, in the nearest sort of capital, which was Newton, the seat of the county. So I went from this jumble into these 4 clusters, and I had on the computer and in manila envelopes them all labeled, cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3. So then I had to break these down further, and so I made these massive timelines, literally just in Microsoft Excel, as specific as I could get them, not just week, not just day, but like time. If I knew that a police officer, because he had his radio on, had said, "I'm driving down Main Street at 9:22 on October 24th, that went in. And in as fine a detail as I could, I made these outlines for every one of these, every step of the investigation, every movement Willie made, everything that happened in trial, who testified when, for how long. And I made this massive character web to try to keep track of everyone's name. And I had on the wall of a bedroom in our apartment, which we had turned into an office, what a friend called my murder board, which was like, that scene in procedural dramas where the cops, following a lead, bust into where they think the bad guy is, and he's gone, but in his stead is this super creepy looking wall of mugshots and like yarn, and so I had that. Because I had to figure out a way to get a grip on this, and it was too much to hold in my head, so I had all these sort of visual, we'll call them techniques, which makes them sound sophisticated. I mean, they were like acts of desperation. So then I had this, and once again I thought, okay, great. I have no idea what to do. Like, how do you, again, go from this to a compelling narrative. How do you sequence this? In what order do you tell these things? So I had one option, which you will all be familiar with, which I thought of as like the Law and Order option, which, if you've seen an episode of Law and Order, you know, it opens with the scene of the crime. And then there's the commercial and a credit break. And then there's the detective showing up on the scene. And you follow the investigation. So that would have been sort of crime and investigation. So you could do that sequence. You could also do what I thought of as the Shawshank strategy. If you've ever seen Shawshank Redemption, that movie begins, also about a wrongful conviction, that movie begins focused on the defendant's sort of face at trial upon hearing the verdict. And only through flashbacks do you figure out how he got there, and you realize, oh my God, he's the wrong guy. I could imagine starting this, Willie, so the way Willie's alibi ends is he comes home from work one day and his girlfriend tells him the police came looking for him. And he says, how come? And his girlfriend says, they didn't say. And Willie says, well, let's go drive up to the police station to find out what they need. And that was his last act as a free man for 25 years. So I could imagine a version where we start with Willie coming home from work. And I just didn't know the right sequence, what sequence would have the most impact. And I had this problem, which was that two of these occur coincidentally. The police investigation and the alibi are the same 6 or 7 days on different sides of town, and each has its own cast of characters. And you can only move the camera so many times before I lose track. I mean, you just can't keep all that in your head. And so I, again, didn't know what to do. I also had this question of, at what point do I want to reveal that Willie's the wrong guy? I had this idea early on, briefly, that I thought it would be really clever if I wrote the crime as though it were Willie. And so the reader was in the position of Carrie Elliott, thinking this was the assailant. And only gradually did you realize that was wrong. And if you know right away it's not him, then you observe the police investigation as like a car crash in slow motion. You think, oh no, oh no. I mean, you see it going wrong. On the other hand, if you don't know he's not the wrong guy, then you get a kind of surprise twist at the end of the chapter. And I'm trying to find a way to make this dramatic, but not sort of cheaply tacky, sensationalized, unreasonable. And I could not figure it out, so I spent more days pulling my hair out and panicking. And then I read this story, totally coincidence, just as part of my own reading, called The Bravest Woman in Seattle, by a writer named Eli Sanders, who writes for The Stranger, which is a magazine out in Seattle. And that story, it won the Pulitzer Prize for magazine feature writing in 2009.